We were at Efteling recently. For those who aren't from the Netherlands, it's an amusement park and a pretty big deal around here. You could perhaps compare it to Disneyland, only much smaller and gezellig, as we would say in Dutch. After last week, however, I don't think it's so gezellig anymore. My buddy and I go there almost every year, so we know the tricks for the best theme park experience. On a busy day, you should try the coolest attraction immediately while people are still coming in. On the way to our favorite roller coaster, we passed the haunted house. As we walked along the large walls of the house, I noticed something peeking out between two dark stones. Curious as I am, I went over. With some effort, I pulled out a red notebook. My friend turned to me from a distance with that typical hurry up look on his face. Come on, man, we probably have to stand in line already. Look at this, I replied, holding the crumpled book in the air. I just pulled this out of the wall. Some stupid kid probably stuck it in there, he said, obviously completely uninterested. Let's keep going, I nodded, but tucked the book into my backpack. During the day, while we stood in the queues, I read everything. It was a diary of another park visitor, and it was quite disturbing. The book was almost falling apart, so I have listed some fragments from it here. I told my therapist that I like to write, so she advised me to keep a diary of my experiences and feelings. Well, here I am. Where should I start? I didn't have a particularly good year. Actually, it was quite terrible. Terrible things have happened. I don't feel like writing about it now, maybe later. I'm currently coming off my antidepressants because I'm feeling a bit better. Hopefully the worst is behind me. My little brother recently invited me to an amusement park. I think I'll go. It was my favorite park as a child, and I feel ready for it. I'm writing because the cool day turned out to be quite eerie. I think I'll start with the good things. I immediately recognized that exciting feeling when we entered the theme park. It transported me back to my childhood when things weren't so bad. Good times. I hadn't been to Efteling for 15 years, and they've built 4 new roller coasters since then. While my brother and I were on our way to one of them, I saw him for the first time, or should I say it? I'm not quite sure. I'll get back to that later. Anyway, we passed the haunted house, crossed a small square next to it, and I looked up at a snack stand. I accidentally met its gaze. The doll was standing behind one of the windows above the snack stand. It wasn't particularly well made, but it somehow stood out to me. Maybe it was because it was looking directly at me with an angry expression on its wrinkled, crooked face. Its eyes scared me the most. They had such a lifelike quality that I could feel the anger and pain behind them. I didn't think much of it. It was probably just a creepy addition to the haunted house. Nevertheless, I felt strangely uncomfortable, even though it was still early in the day. Despite the strange feeling, we moved on, and the queue for the roller coaster took about 45 minutes, but it was absolutely worth it. The roller coaster was the best I've ridden in years. When we came out, full of adrenaline, I shouted enthusiastically, "Wow, that was insane! Let's go again while the line is still short." My brother said he needed something to eat first. I wasn't hungry, but agreed to go back with him to the snack stand by the haunted house. Besides, I needed to use the restroom. While my brother got an ice cream, I went to the restroom next to the stand. When I looked up, I instinctively looked for the doll in the windows above the snack stand, but it wasn't there. I stared at the window in disbelief and let my gaze sweep over the other windows. Nothing. It was gone. just as I decided not to think anything more of it. Maybe it was removed for repairs or something. I noticed the half-open door under the window. Normally, I wouldn't waste a thought on looking inside a service door that stood open, but this time felt different. The door had something magnetic about it, as if it were inviting me in. I glanced to the right, where my brother was still in the queue, and couldn't suppress my curiosity. Quietly, I crept to the door and slipped inside. Inside, I found myself in a musty room that looked like it hadn't been entered in years. In front of me, a creaking wooden staircase led upward. Hesitantly and with a thumping heart, I began to walk up the steps, carefully avoiding the thick spiderwebs. The upper floor was just as dusty as the lower one. The room felt strange, damp and oppressive. Although there were several large windows, only a little daylight fell in. The room was empty. The wooden floors were covered with a thick layer of dust, and the gray walls were bare. As I slowly looked around, I began to feel like an intruder. Then I noticed something in a dark corner, a crumpled old piece of paper. I picked it up and had to cough because of the stirred-up dust. On the paper was a note. The ritual was performed in the room behind the haunted house. It shouldn't have caused any harm, but the room is now corrupted. It's best not to let any more people in. I couldn't make any sense of it. It seemed to be a private message, but at the corner of the paper, I discovered dried, dark red stains. Blood. Before I could finish the thought, I suddenly felt a strong hand on my shoulder. Ah! Startled, I turned around and looked directly into the angry face of an older park employee. He was old, maybe in his 70s, and looked vaguely familiar. "What the hell are you doing here, boy?" he barked at me. "This area is taboo." "The door was open," I stammered, still shocked by the sudden appearance of the man. "I thought it belonged to the haunted house." "It doesn't," he bellowed, throwing a quick look behind me. "You opened the door again, didn't you?" he muttered before turning back to me. Before I could say anything, I was already pushing past him toward the stairs. I dared to look back as I went down the first steps. The park employee stood motionless and just watched me as I left. But I swear, in the darkness behind him, I could see a slender, long silhouette moving silently toward him. My heart raced as I pushed open the creaking service door and stumbled out. My brother was waiting outside, having just bought his ice cream. He had obviously noticed nothing. "Damn queues everywhere," he grumbled. Then he looked at me more closely. "Wow, you're pale as a sheet. Is everything okay?" I forced myself to smile, though I was shaking inside. "Yeah, everything's fine," I muttered as I brushed a spiderweb out of my hair. "Let's ride the roller coaster again." But although I tried to act casual, the strange experience wouldn't let me go. As we passed the windows, the doll was back. It looked exactly as before, angry, the piercing eyes directed at me. Suddenly I realized why the old park employee had seemed so familiar. It was his face. The doll had the same face as him. I stood rooted to the spot and stared at the doll. Its angry look seemed to go right through me, as if it were reading my thoughts. An ice-cold shiver ran down my spine. "Time to go, old man," my brother said, poking me with his elbow. "Why are you just standing there?" I pointed to the doll and asked him, "Have you ever seen this doll before?" "Sure," he shrugged his shoulders. "Our parents brought us here before. It always scared me as a child. I always thought it moved if you stared at it long enough." In that moment, a new shiver ran through me. The doll's angry eyes continued to stare at me, and I had the feeling that they were piercing my soul. We went home, and I was glad to leave the park, but the experience wouldn't let me go. When we arrived home, I spent the evening with Netflix, trying to relax and forget everything, but it didn't help. Obviously, one doesn't forget evil dolls so easily. The experiences from the weekend still haunt me, but it's not just a weird feeling. Strange things are actually happening. First, I constantly feel watched. It doesn't matter where I am, in the cafeteria at work, on my bike, or simply in the bathroom. I always have the feeling that someone is standing behind me and breathing over my shoulder. Sometimes I swear I see the shadow of a figure hanging over me. The nights are even worse. Usually, I watch some TV and then fall asleep, but that's no longer possible. Every time I'm about to fall asleep, I hear a soft scratching at my window. It starts very subtly, like the scratching of long nails on glass. I've tried to find a logical explanation, but there is none. There are no trees in my front garden, so there can't be branches, and birds are ruled out too. They have no place to land. When I want to check the window, the sound suddenly stops as soon as I want to leave the bed. Every time I want to muster the courage to get up, something seems to hold me back. I panic and can't move further. In the end, I always crawl back under the covers and hope that the noise doesn't return, but it always comes back. I haven't slept for 3 nights. Tomorrow I will visit my therapist. I was at my therapist's this morning and told her everything, even the story with the forbidden door in the park. I'm not sure if she believed me, but she prescribed sleeping pills. That's disappointing, as I thought I had finally left the pills behind me, but I guess I have no other choice. I've called in sick for work. I'm simply too tired. I'm taking one of the pills now and hoping to finally get some sleep. The sleeping pills work wonderfully, but I had a terrible night. I slept for a long time, but I had nightmares. In the dream, I was back in the room with the doll. The old park employee was also there. He spoke to me. "Always keep the door closed," he repeated over and over with a hoarse voice. "No one should enter this room." Then I felt someone grab me. It wasn't the old man. The fingers were unnaturally long and pinched my skin. Just as I wanted to turn around to see what it was, I woke up bathed in sweat. That wasn't all. When I was awake, I swear I saw shadows moving away from my bed and gliding toward the window. I don't feel rested at all, but I'll go to work today. Let's see how that goes. What a damn weird day. I came home from work about an hour ago, and my heart is still beating like crazy. I think I'm losing my mind. It all began when I was driving home from work. My short way home leads through a dark park without streetlights until I reach the next residential area. With only the weak light of my bike lamp, I suddenly saw a dark figure in front of me. It stood directly on the path near the large pond. At first, I thought nothing of it. It was only 9:00 p.m., and the park is a popular spot for dog owners. But the closer I came, the more I noticed that something was wrong. The silhouette was slender and had a human form, but it didn't move. It was as if it were waiting for something. My instincts screamed at me to turn around, but I ignored them. Just someone taking a walk, I kept telling myself. But as I came closer, I could see the head of the figure. Long hair that turned toward me. I tried to calm down, but my pulse raced. I rode past the figure and forced myself not to look, but of course I did, and in that moment, I almost fell off my bike. A skinny, pale arm reached for me and missed my shoulder by a few inches. I saw how the moonlight reflected on long, shiny nails. Then I looked directly into red glowing eyes and a yellow, cruel smile. "Cruels," he screamed, kicked the pedals, and rode as fast as I could without stopping until I was home. My heart raced, and my mind was a total chaos. I knew I had to do something. I've spent the last hour searching online for information. There had to be a connection with the room in the park. Unfortunately, I found almost nothing. The doll room was mentioned nowhere, and most fan pages focused on the big attractions. But then I came across an old black and white photo from the 60s. It showed the old park employee I had seen in the room. He stood behind the control levers of an old carousel that had long since been demolished. The terrifying thing was that he looked exactly the same as last week when I met him in the room. No trace of aging. In the photo, however, he looked happy, with friendly eyes and an unconcerned smile. I uploaded the picture to my phone and decided that I had to find out who this man was. While I was doing that, I noticed a small movement from the corner of my eye from the window. My heart skipped a beat. I am too tired to think anymore. I'm taking another sleeping pill and hoping that the nightmare finally ends. This will presumably be my last entry. I'm back in the park at night. I can hardly believe it myself, but I knew I needed answers. I slept long this morning and drove off in the afternoon. When I arrived shortly before the park closed, I showed one of the employees at the ticket office the old photo and told a made-up story about wanting to write an article about the old man. The employee was visibly irritated and called an older colleague. When he finally came, it was already getting dark. The man, who introduced himself as Jim, seemed to be an old hand in the park business and was ready to speak with me. We sat down on a bench, and I showed him the picture. His facial expression changed abruptly from relaxed to serious. "Oh yeah, that's Bob," he finally said. "Anyone who works here long enough remembers him. He was here during my early days, but the photo is over 40 years old. Bob should have been dead long ago." I felt the goosebumps run down my back and asked carefully, "Is he really dead?" "Are you sure?" Jim frowned. "Of course, Bob was in his 70s when this photo was taken. He should have been dead long ago." He made a short pause before speaking further. "I was about 15 years old at the time, so I don't remember all the details, but Bob was a special guy. He had his moods, you know, depression. He had bad experiences in World War I, was in a concentration camp, and many of his family members were killed. But here in the park, he seemed happy. Maybe that was the reason why he stayed here beyond his retirement age." Jim laughed briefly before his tone became more serious. "But in 1968, something happened. It was about the time this photo was taken. There was a problem with the haunted house. A technical defect in one of the dolls. It led to a strange accident. My mouth was suddenly dry, and I swallowed hard. "What kind of accident?" I asked with a trembling voice. Jim sighed deeply and continued. "The doll had to be removed, and Bob, who always had a strange fascination for the haunted house, offered to take care of it. We told him he should let the mechanics do it, but he insisted on doing it himself. He had some experience as an electrician, so we gave in. He took the broken doll over his shoulder and disappeared into the building. Jim fell silent for a while before adding with a low voice, "We never saw him again." His words made the air around us heavy. Finally, he spoke further. I still remember his last words. They were, and still ring in my head. "Wish me luck," he said. "I think I'll need it." I was numb. Jim continued telling the story. Jim continued. The police found nothing, neither Bob nor the doll. Finally, they came to the conclusion that he probably committed suicide somewhere far away. It was terrible. "And the doll?" I brought out. Jim looked at me strangely. "The doll. It was a pretty thing, you know. A pale ghost girl in a white dress. Very well made, with long, scary nails. Bob always held her with so much affection." My stomach turned over and I asked, "Don't you think the doll above the snack stand looks a bit like Bob?" Jim frowned and looked at me as if I had lost my mind. "What? No. Why should she look like Bob? The doll has been there forever. I've known it since I've worked here." He cast a glance at his watch and stood up. "Well, I have to go. My wife will be mad if I'm late for dinner." He handed me a card with an email address and added, "Send me the article when you're finished." "I'm curious what you make of it." I said goodbye to Jim and watched him as he disappeared through the staff entrance door. A spontaneous decision came over me. I had to find out more. I sneaked after Jim, keeping enough distance so that he wouldn't notice me. When the door was about to close behind him, I held it open and slipped in. I hid between some thick bushes in a secluded corner of the park. The darkness surrounded me, and my heart hammered in my chest. I waited until enough time had passed to be sure that no one was nearby. Now I'm here, near the haunted house, and preparing to return to that room. I don't know why, but I have the feeling that I will find some kind of answer here. This will really be my last entry. I'm in the room. I had sneaked out of my hiding place and stood in front of the haunted house. The sight of the building made my heart beat faster. I looked up at the window behind which the doll was. Her silhouette was all too familiar, even in the dark. I opened the door, which moved as if by itself, and stepped in. Again, my instinct seemed to scream that I should go back, but my legs moved almost on their own. When I stood upstairs in the empty room, I suddenly felt the strong hands on my shoulders again. This time they were not painful, but gentle. "Why have you come back?" I heard the sad voice of Bob behind me. "Why have you come back?" repeated Bob with a low, almost pleading voice. I was too shocked to turn around or give an answer. My mind still didn't seem to be able to grasp the situation. Maybe until this moment, I had believed that everything was just a crazy dream, but when I heard his voice, I knew it was real. "You escaped," he said, this time a bit louder. "But I fear it was already too late when you opened the door the first time." I felt my breath catch. His words echoed in my ears, and an unholy silence laid itself over the room. "The horrors of this world find you everywhere," Bob continued. "When they found me, it was too late. A shame, a damn shame." He fell silent for a moment before speaking again, this time with a certain urgency in his voice. "Ah, there you are." His words sent a cold shiver down my spine. Even before I could turn around, I felt a presence behind me. The room seemed suddenly to darken, and from the corner of my eye I could see a slender silhouette. The doll, she was there. I turned around and saw her quite clearly. She was beautiful if one ignored the bloodstains on her white dress and the red eyes in her pale face. She smiled an eerie smile that bared her yellow, pointed teeth. Slowly, she raised her arm and her long, shiny nails touched my shoulder. In this moment, a wave of despair overcame me. It was as if the entire sadness that I had tried to suppress in the last months returned at once. The memories that I had so carefully locked away broke forth like a dam. She was dead. She was dead and would never come back. Tears ran down my face as I recognized this truth again. There was nothing left to live for. I hadn't managed to move on, but suddenly I tore myself away. Somewhere deep within me, I found the strength to shake her hand from my shoulder, and I ran. I ran as fast as I could down the stairs and out through the door. But it didn't matter. Every time I thought I had found the exit, I landed back in this room. They had me in a trap, or had they kept me here from the beginning? Now I sit in a dark corner of the room, trying to write the last sentences of my diary. My phone is almost empty and I have no signal. I don't know why it's so important to me to finish this entry. Maybe because I don't want to be forgotten. Maybe because I hope that someone finds this diary one day and understands what happened. They've left me alone for a while, but I feel them coming closer. I can't run anymore. I'm too tired. Wish me luck. I think I'll need it. That's some intense Halloween crap, said my friend and laid the diary on the table. We sat in a restaurant near the park exit shortly before it closed. Have you noticed how shaky the last words are written? That's really intense. Yeah, pretty eerie, I muttered and chewed absent-mindedly on a fry. But I wonder, is there really this room behind the haunted house and the creepy doll? Of course there's the doll, replied my friend. Have you never seen it? When he noticed my baffled facial expression, he added, It's been there forever. I saw it on my first visit here. I checked my phone and finally nodded. Let's go look, I said determinedly. Really? I thought we wanted to have a beer, he complained. It's just an old doll. You'll find hundreds of them in the park. Just for a second. We still have the whole evening to get drunk, I answered and stood up. It took about 10 minutes until we had fought our way through the crowd of people leaving the park. Finally, we stood in front of the aforementioned snack stand next to the haunted house. I looked up and felt a cold shiver run down my back. The doll was there. It had the same angry facial expression the diary author had described. Its eyes seemed to stare directly at me. There it is, I said quietly and pointed up. As I got closer, however, my perception changed. From up close, the doll was anything but frightening. The paint on its face was peeling off and its clothes were in tatters. It looked like it urgently needed restoration. Disappointing, I muttered while I felt the wall under the window with my hand, and there isn't even a door as described in the story. I told you so, said my friend and shrugged his shoulders. Let's go. I nodded and turned to leave, but suddenly stopped. Wait a minute, I said. Is there also a window on the other side? I ignored my friend's annoyed sigh and walked around the snack stand. Indeed, there was a second window opposite the first. In this window stood another doll. It didn't look old and wasn't creepy either. It was a young man with a pale face. His eyes seemed to be directed straight at me, full of despair. Then I noticed something in his right hand. It was a red notebook. Damn! Shouted my friend behind me. I instinctively reached for my backpack. The diary was gone. Do you have it? I asked, confused. No, he answered. I thought I gave it back to you. Maybe you forgot it in the restaurant. Yeah, maybe, I muttered while I looked up at the window again. The doll continued to stare at me, the notebook held tight in its hand. I wanted to go closer to take a better look, but in that moment, an impatient park employee stepped toward us and sent us away. "The park is closing," he said sharply. On the way out, I felt like I was in a trance. When I arrived home, I checked the photos I had taken of the doll. The picture of the old doll was clear and distinct, but the picture of the second doll, the young man with the notebook, was completely black. Maybe my finger was on the lens, maybe not. I've decided to visit the park again next year, and maybe you should too if you ever get the chance. But if you ever see an open door behind the haunted house, ignore it. Does anyone else remember those giant indoor playgrounds from back then? You'd beg your parents to visit one of those magical places with huge ball pits, tangled tunnels, and slides that made your butt hurt all the way down. Together with friends, you'd pretend to be a brave explorer on quests through the labyrinth of brightly colored plastic, or you'd play hide and seek while rushing through climbing frames in exciting ways, balancing on ropes, flitting around on quiet paths, and racing headfirst down the tunnel slides. My childhood playground was called Adventureland. The name alone brings a wave of nostalgia over me, followed by a shiver. It was in a shopping mall about 20 minutes from my house. From the outside, it looked a bit run down, aside from the colorful block letters decorating the entrance. Once inside, a child could get lost in the fascinating environment for hours, maybe even days, if the parents allowed it. I will never forget the tunnel slides. Those few seconds of darkness thrilled me again and again. It didn't matter if your eyes were open or closed. It looked the same to every child, a shared blackness seen by all who dared to plunge into its deep gullet. I had a love-hate relationship with one very specific slide. I remember standing at the top, holding my breath. The slide went down 4 stories, which was higher than my damn house, and emptied onto the floor of the playground. 4 stories of darkness, a red plastic pipe with no light, no windows, nothing to hold on to while you slid down helplessly. Sometimes I lingered at the top, a certain fear holding me in place. I let other children slide before me and heard their screams fade away. Then I looked nervously at the other end of the slide. A part of me wondered what would happen if the child somehow got lost in the tunnel and was never seen again. Before those thoughts could become reality, I saw the child emerge unharmed with a broad grin on their face. "It's safe," said a voice in my head, a voice that became clearer as I got older. The voice of reason. See, there's nothing to fear, but sometimes the voice is wrong. Sometimes a child's gut feeling isn't just their imagination playing a trick. When every hair on your body feels like needles on a fir tree, you just know something is wrong. Adults don't believe you. Why should they? You're just a child. Your opinion is unimportant. That's why, when the adults, including my parents, didn't believe me when I told them my sister had been kidnapped by the man who lived in the tunnels of Adventureland, no one thought it was serious. After all, I was just a child whose sister had disappeared. Was A.B. There were always those stupid rumors spreading around town back in a time before text messages and social media existed. Stories were traded on concrete steps like Pokemon cards, or in front of kiosks where a few dollars were enough to buy sweets for a whole day. People spoke of someone hiding razor blades in the cracks of the tunnel slides. An unsuspecting child slid down and came out with a cut as large as the Mississippi River on their back. I always wondered how someone could stick a razor blade in there with the slides being so slippery. Other rumors claimed that people hid in the ball pits. If a child alone came too close, they would grab them, pull them up, and whisk them away through a secret trap door at the bottom of the ball pit. "How many children have they already kidnapped?" I asked with fearful eyes. "Oh, hundreds," my friends answered indifferently, and we went back to trading Pokemon cards. I always took these rumors with a grain of salt. Were they true? Probably not. Could they be true? Possibly. It was enough to make me enter Adventureland with caution. I always took extra time to crawl through the tunnels where someone could be hidden, waiting to grab me. Emily, my younger sister, wasn't as cautious as I was. She was naive and vulnerable. I was the one who showed Emily the wonders of Adventureland. I proudly showed her how to use the tracks and gave her tips for the arcade games that earned you the most tickets. I also led her through the tunnels and down the tunnel slides, including the 4-story high slide. I couldn't show her fear, so I plunged down without hesitation. I heard her giggling until I was about halfway down. Then I heard nothing for a few seconds. Everything went dark. I was alone. I thought of the hidden razor blades, but before I could panic, I emerged into the light. I sighed with relief and looked into the smiling face of my sister. I waved cheerfully. "See, there's nothing to fear," I said. He couldn't scare her with rumors of unproven dangers. I couldn't tell her to watch out for razor blades in the slides, or kidnappers in ball pits, or used syringes in the tunnels. If you had seen how she looked up at me, you would understand. It was as if I were her hero. The night before her disappearance, I had a terrible nightmare. I was in Adventureland, standing in front of the giant playground. The arcade behind me was silent. I was alone. An oppressive pain lay on my chest. That same inexplicable fear I had felt during those few seconds in the red tunnel slide reappeared. Only this time it was longer and more agonizing. My eyes wandered upward to one of the tunnels. There, in one of the fisheye windows, was a man. His ugly face was twisted into a mocking grin as he looked at me with morbid pleasure. With a long, crooked finger, he motioned for me to come to him, and my body began to move, climbing higher and higher until I woke up. My bed was soaked with sweat. I saw the grinning face of the man every time I closed my eyes, only now it was even more distorted. I shuddered and tried to go back to sleep. I knew the bad news would come seconds before the phone rang. My mother took the call, and I began to scream. Together, we drove to Adventureland to find my sister. The police were already there. They closely observed the people coming and going. I overheard several adults talking during the day, and here is what I was able to piece together. Emily was at a birthday party for one of her classmates. When it was time to go into one of the side rooms for pizza and cake, my father, as one of the supervisors, did a quick head count. He noticed my sister was missing. After waiting impatiently for a while, he began calling her name through the slides. She didn't come out. Some of the children went in to look for her, and when they came out empty-handed, everything went wrong. My father started blowing up at one of the supervisors and demanded a search party for Emily. The police were called. They found nothing either. Adults began telling stories of a kidnapping where a child was taken into the bathroom, their head shaved, and then smuggled out under a quick disguise. The same must have happened to Emily, they said. It was at this point that a missing person report went out for my sister. I must have searched the playground a dozen times looking for Emily. I knew it was useless. She had been kidnapped by the man I had seen in my dreams, the man who lived in the tunnels. I just knew it, but who would believe me? Adventureland closed its doors forever a few days later when the police asked for surveillance footage of the premises. The owner admitted shamefully that no cameras were installed. When the building was examined more closely, it turned out that Adventureland had several conspicuous safety defects. Emily's plastic tube grave was sealed the next day. I knew she was still in there somewhere. Whether she was still alive was another question. My parents were too busy with Emily's disappearance to notice that I had gone on a long bike ride. My mission was to find my sister and bring her back. The outside of Adventureland looked even more rundown than usual. I walked around the building looking for a way in. There was a door with a small wooden window above the handle. Above the handle, I took a stone and broke the glass. The security alarm didn't go off, and I let myself in. I slipped through the building until I came to the main room. The playground looked like the skeleton of a giant exotic animal. The only light source came from the windows at the front, which gave the room an eerie amber glow. I stepped cautiously onto one of the animal's tunnels and stood there hesitantly. It was pitch black. I rummaged in my backpack and pulled out the flashlight I had brought. I turned it on and cast the beam of light across the playground. My light jumped from one fisheye window to the next, searching for the mocking face from my nightmare. When they all seemed clear, I pointed the light into the tunnel. Then I reached into my pocket, my hand around the cold handle of my pocket knife. I began to change my mind. What if the man was still here, waiting for me? Sure, I had my knife with me, but would it be enough to fight a grown man? Maybe if I hit him in the carotid artery. Artery binds, paw. I didn't know exactly where the carotid artery was, but my friend swore if you're hit there, you're as good as dead. What if I missed? It would take 3 seconds for him to overpower me and rip my guts out. What if this guy wasn't even human? To answer my question, a chuckle came from deep in the darkness. My heart jumped into my throat. I waited a minute, listening intently for footsteps, or in this case for someone sneaking through the tunnels. The place was as silent as an empty cathedral. I thought of Emily, her bright, innocent smile, the way she looked up at me. I felt an invigorating surge of bravery rise within me. He climbed into that damn tunnel, flashlight in one hand, pocket knife in the other. I crawled carefully through the tunnels. I had spent enough time there to know where I was going, but that didn't change how terrifying the darkness was. With every turn, my courage faded more and more. A new feeling took its place. I was going to die here. After crawling through the maze of tunnels for a while, all I could hear was my short, fast breathing and my pounding pulse. Finally, I came across a strange sight. Someone had burned a hole in the plastic wall of the tunnel, but it didn't stop there. The hole continued through the adjacent wall and into the interior of the building. It looked like something from one of those prison break movies on TV. He had taken Emily in there, I thought with a dull sense of anger. I crawled boldly through the hole and ventured behind the wall. I passed the pink, tough wall insulation that looked like cotton candy. The pipes hummed silently above me while I crawled on all fours. The air here was heavy and smelled of a damp cellar. The tunnel finally opened into a small concrete room. In a corner lay a dirty mattress with scattered pieces of clothing on it. Several yellowed newspapers and envelopes lay on the floor, along with a few beer cans and cans of beans. I picked up a random envelope that was simply addressed to a person named Mr. Robert Gray, without an address or sender information. An unpleasant thought crossed my mind. Had someone lived here? Was his name Robert Gray? With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and pulled out the paper inside. There was a message written on it, apparently with blood. "See, there's nothing to fear." I ran out quickly. During my frantic escape, I thought I heard something following me. I turned my head as I went back into the tunnel, and I could have sworn I saw a pair of orange eyes floating toward me. They seemed to be getting closer. There was no time to think. I slipped through the winding tubes of plastic. I didn't dare shine the light behind me. Whatever was following me was definitely not human. I had only one chance if I wanted to survive, and that chance came quickly, the 4-story high tunnel slide. Without hesitation, I threw myself headfirst down, closed my eyes, and waited to be torn to pieces by dozens of razor blades. Before I knew it, I landed on solid ground. I jumped to my feet and ran for the exit. My pursuer was no longer behind me, but I was taking no chances. I didn't slow down until I was on my bike and at least half a mile away from Adventureland. I looked over my shoulder the whole time, searching for those glowing orange eyes, but I got home safely. My parents didn't even notice I was gone, and didn't know they almost lost another child that day. I kept my encounter in Adventureland to myself all these years. No one would have believed me. Back then, I was just a stupid child with an imagination poisoned by my younger sister's kidnapping. But even as I got older, I was only seen as a damaged child with a traumatic past. My word had no value. I kept an eye on the old Adventureland building location. It later became a hibachi restaurant. Yusha, too. They held a fundraiser there, and the chef put cyanide into one of the dishes, poisoning a dozen people. 8 of them died. After that, it became a house of worship. A defective cable led to a fire breaking out during one of the services, killing 14 people. Today, it stands as a daycare center without incident. I work at an amusement park to earn my living. I want to earn my... I cannot reveal the name or exact location of the park, as I would definitely lose my job. All I can say is that the park is in the United States and is quite busy during the day, especially in the early hours. Although I plan to quit as soon as possible, I can't afford to get fired financially at the moment. The park pays quite well and offers more benefits than any other workplace I've ever dreamed of. My uncle had close connections to one of the senior executives in park management, so he was able to get me a job at the park about 2 years ago. I took this position hastily because there aren't many well-paying jobs for recent college graduates. My first job was as a ride operator, but over time my uncle let his contacts know that I could be considered for additional tasks in the park. They were minor things like filling in for absent colleagues for a day, but it was during those occasions that the strangest things began to happen. I have seen the strangest, scariest, and most terrible things in this park, which is why I am here. I will describe to you the darkest and most inexplicable events I have experienced firsthand. When I started working exclusively as a ride operator, I was always told that the safety of employees and customers was the top priority. In the first few months, I had no problems with this, as I had just started working in my own station. But one night after work, I was talking to a colleague, Marley, near the ride where she normally worked. We weren't actually allowed to be in that area of the park at that time, but we had stayed a bit longer cleaning up around Marley's stand. We were chatting quite casually until Marley suddenly froze and jerked her head toward the ride, which stood there dark and ominous at night. Her eyes were wild and had that strange glint that I couldn't identify at the time. "Could you please go over there and turn the ride on?" she asked me. "Are you insane? Someone will notice. It's a giant ride and it's in the middle of the park," I countered. "Please, just do it," she said through gritted teeth, visibly annoyed. I grumbled, but reluctantly went to the control panel to turn on the ride. The ride was in the children's area of the park, which was mostly surrounded by woods. It was relatively small and not a roller coaster, but it still drew a good number of visitors. In the middle was a red and yellow rotating disc on a curved blue track. When the ride was on, the disc spun and moved up and down along the track. I turned the ride on, and Marley just stared at the rotating disc as it moved back and forth. Then she climbed over the fence that separated her from the ride. I screamed Marley's name and told her to get out of there. It was extremely dangerous, as there were only about 3 meters of clearance between the ride and the fence. While I was turning the ride off and swearing, Marley shouted something I couldn't quite understand. All I heard was the phrase, "Give me Caroline." As the ride began to slow down, Marley moved closer and closer. And closer, she came so close that the wind generated by the ride's movement blew her hair wildly. Her golden brown eyes remained fixed on the red and yellow striped disc. Marley threw herself into the path of the ride. The disc hit her with full force, throwing her body over 10 meters away to the other side of the ride before she hit the ground with a dull thud. Blood and guts splattered everywhere, on the ride and the concrete walkway of the queue. I heard screams from a distance that I had never heard before, and later realized that it was me who was screaming. Within minutes, 2 park managers came to the ride. One shook his head and muttered something like, "Another one." They stroked my hair, which even back then I found quite creepy. It took almost an hour for me to stop screaming and crying hysterically. Only then did I notice that neither police nor an ambulance had arrived. Instead, a bored janitor came with a dirty garbage truck. He picked up Marley's body and threw it carelessly inside. It was simply terrible. When I tried to explain what happened, the managers just shook their heads, acted as if they were sad, and said, "We know. That happens sometimes." The following night, while reviewing the events in my head, I realized that my high salary was not for nothing. I was being paid to keep my mouth shut about the terrible things that had gone wrong and would still go wrong. Since that night when I witnessed Marley's tragic death, I've been considering my options, not just for myself, but for Marley's family, the visitors to the park, and the families of previous victims who apparently came to harm through the park's obvious mismanagement. Since that night when I witnessed Marley's tragic death, I've been considering my options, not just for myself, but for Marley's family, the visitors to the park, and the families of previous victims who apparently came to harm through the park's obvious mismanagement. I decided first to contact Marley's family to apologize personally for what had happened. That would be difficult, especially once the police were involved. But unfortunately, a thorough Google search revealed that Marley's immediate family, her 2 sisters, her twin brother, and her parents had all committed suicide. Each of these deaths occurred exactly 1 year apart. First, it was Marley's father, then her twin brother, her mother, her oldest sister, and finally her other sister. Molly's death coincided exactly with the death of her family, September 17th, exactly 1 year after the death of her older sister in 2013. Since I had no success with Marley's immediate family, I decided to contact the next of kin cousins, aunts, uncles, and so on. After hours of searching, I finally found the phone number of one of Marley's cousins, a woman named Nan, who was apparently only 2 years younger than Marley. I wrote her a message immediately and asked for a meeting, since Nan and her family lived only about an hour away from me. To make it short, Nan was really friendly and understanding. I told her I'd rather talk in person about what had happened instead of over the phone or by message. She generously agreed to host me in her home. The only thing she told me was that her parents were very sensitive about Marley and her immediate family. Apparently, there had been a big fight a few years ago that had escalated into a full-blown feud within a few weeks. With this thought in mind, I made my way to Nan's parents' house after receiving the address. I was incredibly nervous, but felt that a part of this massive burden could be taken off my shoulders, at least temporarily. I rang the bell, and Nan greeted me with a crooked smile that I found charming at the time. She led me into the house, introduced me to her parents, and explained that I had information about the missing Marley. Her family's reaction was strange. They cast perplexed looks at each other, not curious, but rather skeptical and confused. Nan's mother, whom we can call Christine, offered me a seat on a cozy-looking leather armchair, which I gratefully accepted. I began by telling them that I work at the amusement park. When they asked me the name of the park, I hesitated to name it. A small cacophony of, "Oh, I love that place," was the answer, which made me cringe inside. After a few excruciatingly silent seconds, I began to tell my story. My words cut through the warm but somehow uncomfortable, quiet atmosphere in the room. My narrative seemed to hang in the air until suddenly Nan's sister burst out laughing. A moment later, the rest of the family joined in her laughter. They laughed so hard that their faces took on a rosy pink hue that eventually turned into an ugly mottled red. I was completely stunned. Then I heard a sentence that would never leave my head. "Ding dong, the witch is dead." I was serious. I was so shocked by their reaction that I felt torn between offense and a strange, uncomfortable kind of horror that I had never experienced before. "We believe you," Nan's father Richard finally said, in the middle of his hiccuping fits of laughter. I was horrified, to say the least. But suddenly Richard's laughter stopped. The trace of humor that had been on his face just moments ago vanished instantly and gave way to pure, unfiltered rage. Richard stood up, turned to his family, who were still laughing, though now more hesitantly. "Stop laughing, damn it!" he screamed. The laughter slowly died away and gave way to a nervous giggle that finally froze completely. "I mean it. Stop laughing." Richard suddenly grabbed a chair in the room and rammed it with full force into a window. The glass shattered into 1,000 glittering fragments that reflected the sunlight. Richard screamed incoherent words the whole time, and I didn't know what to do. I just sat there paralyzed. It was terrifying, especially because windows, at least the ones I know, don't break that easily. But he had managed to completely splinter the wooden frame of the window without hitting it directly. Then Richard turned around with the chair in his hand and struck Christine, his wife, down with it. She fell unconscious to the floor with a gaping wound on her temple. Nan screamed at her father while her sister ran panically out of the house. I just sat there, unable to move. Nan screamed that she would call the police and ordered me to leave the house. I was more than happy to show myself out after all that had just happened. I drove home, my hands shaking the whole way. That night, I couldn't find any sleep. My head was a complete mess, and I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened in that house full of crazy people. I'm sorry if this report isn't particularly coherent. My mind is still struggling to process everything I experienced yesterday. This happened in the summer of 2008, toward the end of my 8th grade. My parents had sent me to school a little early, so I was 13 years old at the time. A small note: I didn't reach puberty until I was in high school, so I was one of the smallest in my class. The point is, no one could have mistaken me for an adult. The 8th grade graduation trip that year was a visit to the nearest amusement park, Six Flags Great America. During the first part of the visit, I was in a group of about 6 students. After a few rides, my group wanted to take a break, eat something, and relax for a while. However, since this was the year I was actually tall enough to ride the roller coasters, that was all I was interested in. So my friend Kevin and I split off from the group to just ride the roller coasters for the rest of the day. We had already been on a few rides before queuing up a second time for the Raging Bull. By this time, it was getting late and the lines were long, but there was still enough time for a few rides. Unfortunately, I hadn't considered how much my motion sickness would affect me. Every time I got off a roller coaster, I had this feeling of dizziness that got worse with every ride. At first, it disappeared after a few minutes and was completely gone by the next ride, but with every ride it took longer to vanish. So we were standing in line for the Raging Bull again, and I was already starting to feel bad before I even got on. Nevertheless, I didn't want to miss the ride, so I got on anyway, hoping the nausea would disappear as it had on the other rides. Unfortunately, that was not the case. The moment I got off, my world spun, and I had the worst combination of nausea and headache I've ever had in my life. In contrast, Kevin said he wanted to get in line again and ride the Raging Bull one last time before Six Flags closed. At this point, there were only 15 minutes left until closing. This time, however, I told Kevin that I certainly wouldn't ride again. I told him he could go ahead and I would wait for him outside on a bench. He said he didn't want to ride alone, but he saw that I wouldn't change my mind, so he joined the queue while I waited on a bench right in front of the entrance. In hindsight, I think it would have been better to wait with him in the line instead of us splitting up, but I felt like I couldn't stand easily without falling over, so I sat on the bench while he took his last ride without me. 10 minutes passed while I sat on that bench trying to recover. My eyes were closed, and I was trying to relax so that I could only hear the people and music around me. Then I noticed someone repeatedly saying, "Hello." When I realized it, I noticed that I had been hearing it for a while and had simply tuned it out along with all the other noises. My next thought was, I wish this person would answer. Only then did I realize that no one else was nearby except for me and the person who was calling. Finally, it dawned on me. This person was calling me. I turned around and saw a woman I had never seen before standing in the queue for the Raging Bull. She looked like a normal woman in her 30s and had a friendly smile on her face. Back then, I was always very polite and also a bit of a people pleaser, despite how bad I felt. The first thing I did was apologize for not answering immediately and tell her that I hadn't known she was calling me. "Doesn't matter, sweetie. What's your name?" I gave her my first name without thinking much. She replied, "Wow, that's a beautiful name," which I found strange because my name is actually quite common and boring. However, she didn't tell me her name, and I wouldn't have a chance to ask for it because she immediately asked me if I wanted to ride the Raging Bull with her. I simply and politely said I didn't want to and hoped she would leave it at that, as I still felt miserable. "You should come with me," she said. "I can't. I don't feel well. I'm waiting here for my friend." "Oh, come on, you'll be fine," she insisted. "I'm sorry, I really shouldn't. I would probably throw up on the train." She ignored practically everything I said and continued to smile. "Oh, don't worry, just come along," she said. At this point, her tone was still playful. "I'm sorry, but I'm waiting for my friend. He'll be back soon. If I come along, he won't know where I am. He can wait here. Don't worry, it's no problem. You'll feel better." Without paying attention to my concerns, she just said again, "I said it'll be fine. Come on." Finally, I began to think this was strange. Why was this strange woman so intent on me going on this ride with her? I couldn't understand it. Then nothing I said made her leave me alone. I reminded her that Six Flags would be closing soon anyway, so there was no point. At this point, it must have been less than 5 minutes until closing. I knew they wouldn't let anyone else on the train when we arrived. Then she said, "I work here, so it's okay." I didn't understand what that had to do with it. Were employees allowed to ride after closing? I don't know, but I noticed she wasn't wearing a uniform identifying her as an employee. She was just wearing normal street clothes. She must have noticed how I looked at her, because she immediately changed her story. "Okay, I don't work here, but I have many friends who work here." Again, I didn't understand what that had to do with it. Did we have permission to ride after closing just because she had friends working here? And why had she even said she worked here if she actually didn't? Something was wrong here. I then asked her, "Why don't you just ride with your friends?" Because I was still very confused why she was asking me when she apparently had many friends nearby who would soon be off work. Her smile grew wider. "You are special, and I want to ride with you." That made me even more confused and uncomfortable. I continued to try to politely explain why I didn't want to go, repeated my reasons, and tried to be as nice as possible because I didn't like rejecting people or hurting their feelings. I still hoped she would simply accept no as an answer and leave me alone, but she continued to ignore my protests and asked repeatedly if I wanted to come with her, saying it was no big problem and that she didn't want to ride with anyone but me. After a while, she finally said, "Is that your friend?" To my relief, I saw Kevin coming out of the exit. I quickly walked toward him but paused and turned around to wave goodbye to the woman. It still seemed impolite to me to just walk away from someone who had been speaking with me for several minutes, even if she was quite annoying. However, when I turned to her and saw her face, it was the first time I felt truly frightened during this encounter. Throughout the day, she had smiled friendly and nicely, but now she stared at me with a look of pure anger and almost rage. He was the kid who never liked to upset people or get into trouble, so I had never seen anyone look at me like that, let alone look at me like that. It was a look full of hate that made me believe that if I had been closer to her, she might have attacked me. I was so worried about this that I went to Kevin before he reached me and walked quickly with him because I feared she might leave the queue and chase us. Thank God she didn't. But at the same time, I had the feeling she was too smart to attack me in public. The thing is, the queue for the Raging Bull was very long, and most of it was not visible from the outside. Since it was near closing time, the line was mostly empty. If I had gone with her, it would have been just the two of us, completely isolated. The only people I told about this were my parents. When I explained the situation to them, my mother said I wouldn't have made it to the ride if I had gone with her. Only when my mother said that did I realize the woman actually wasn't interested in the ride at all. My father gave me a little speech about never going anywhere alone with someone I didn't know well, and that I should always be out with someone else in public. He pointed out that it would even be dangerous if I were out with another child. My parents said they were glad I had the sense not to go with her. My main thought then and now is that I simply didn't go because I felt sick and didn't want to get my friend or my teachers into trouble by going on the ride so shortly before closing without them knowing where I was. I didn't not go because I was suspicious of her. It only correctly dawned on me now how naive I was to trust this woman until I saw the murderous look she gave me when she realized she had lost me. Over the years, my mind has swung back and forth between assuming she was some kind of predator and trying to give her the benefit of the doubt, especially when I was younger. I really wanted to believe that maybe she really just wanted to ride the raging bull with me, but as an adult, I can no longer give her the benefit of the doubt. What reasonable explanation is there for a 30-year-old asking a middle school child sitting alone to go somewhere with her? Alone?